Most people today are surviving in bodies that are screaming for help while being told they're completely fine. Their labs look normal, their symptoms get dismissed, and somewhere along the way, we stop listening to the intelligence of our human bodies. But what if symptoms weren't random? What if fatigue, brain fog, pain, anxiety, inflammation, they were all actually messages, signals, warnings, an invitation to come back into alignment. Like I say, alignment before anatomy. Today's guest has spent decades asking deeper questions than most practitioners are willing to ask. Dr. Bob Rakowski combines engineering-level systems thinking with functional medicine, clinical nutrition, chiropractic care, acupuncture as well, to uncover what conventional medicine often overlooks. Now, through his new book, Magnificent by Design, he's challenging one of the most dangerous beliefs in modern health, that symptoms should simply be silenced instead of understood. This conversation is about root cause, cellular health, divine design, and what it truly means to age with intention. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Bob Rakowski.
Well, thank you, Art. It's an absolute thrill to be connected to you again. I love your 7 C's, and we got 7 more factors to talk about today. Or maybe
yes,
and 7, maybe 14.
Yeah, well, one of the main reasons I got you on the show here is because I wanted to make sure we talk about your new book.
Well, thank you by that. Magnificent by Design. I don't know if you had a chance to pick up a copy or read the foreword, but the foreword is by Tom Morris, who has his 7 C's of true success. So we are brothers from a different mother, right? We're all great. Thinking in these great 7s and how we can make the world better.
I did see it, and I did read that one chapter, that introductory one, and the foreword. I was like, oh my God, there it is, the 7. It's all about the 7s here. So give us a little bit, give us a story about your life. How did you get started? Health and wellness, chiropractic, all that great stuff.
Well, it was a near-death experience. I was studying electrical engineering in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, studying hard, playing football on the weekends. I took a pretty hard hit, separated a shoulder, got, what we'd call a classic pinched nerve in the neck. I didn't know anything about chiropractic back then. I wish I did, because that hit did a lot to me. But one thing, I went to the medical doctor. He put my arm in a sling, my neck in a brace, gave me muscle relaxers, painkillers. I'm a college kid. I didn't really listen to the doctor. I didn't read the label. It said, don't mix with, alcohol, don't operate heavy machinery, may cause drowsiness. So I went out on a date, had 1 drink. That's my limit. Normally I can handle 1, but this time that 1 drink with the medication caused me to pass out behind the wheel of my car at 55 miles an hour.
Ow.
So my date shook me. I pulled over to the side of the road, and she said, what happened? I said, I think I passed out. She says, no, I know you passed out. I'm driving home. So get home, I go into my kitchen, I pick up that bottle of pills because I'm in pain still, and I grab it and I look, and now I read the label. Don't mix with alcohol, may cause drowsiness. I thought, my gosh, this stuff nearly killed me. So I flushed the meds down the toilet, went back to the gym to start my rehab, and that's when I was referred to the chiropractor that changed my life, because he helped me so much so fast and taught me that the body is designed to heal if we can give it what it needs and eliminate what's in the way of it healing. Powerful philosophy.
And that's where the curiosity started, right?
Yeah, well, I think I've been blessed with curiosity from birth. I've always had that. I've always been one that I want to know the whys and the hows. And, up to that point in my life, it's fascinating that my dad always said, son, you should become a doctor. I said, Dad, why would I become a doctor? I never had a doctor visit that I enjoyed. Not that I didn't like the doctor, but there was just something about it that was very sterile, very cold. And when I met Dr. Mike Wickers, comes in, tells me how the body's going to heal, how we're going to work together, how this is a project. And hey, the power that made the body can heal the body. Some of us call that God. I call it God. We just have to allow divine healing to flow. And it comes from the brain, through the spine, through the body. That's one aspect of interference, but you can have energy interference, biochemical interference. You write about that in your 7 C's. There's lots of things we need to do to live better longer. And I was blessed by that injury because it changed my life for the better forever.
It did. And at that point, you were studying engineering, correct? You stayed on that path.
Well, by the way, I finished it, right? I when I start something, I finish it. That's one good thing my parents taught me. So I went through that 4-year degree. I actually graduated second in my class, got the highest starting salary of anybody in my class. moved to Texas to work for Texas Instruments, and just
Oh, that's how
realized
you
very
got there.
quickly
Okay.
that I can't do this for 40 to 50 years. I don't want to be in a cubicle. I don't want to be crunching numbers. I'm a people person. I want to connect with
Right.
people. And by the way, that, introduction to chiropractic, right away, I started thinking, how does one become a chiropractor? Because I was
Right.
fascinated at what they did.
Yes.
And then they say the rest is history. I had an opportunity to move on. I did, had a very supportive spouse. I was married at the time. And all of a sudden, I go from this high salary to saying, hey, I want to be a student, but here's what we can look forward to. And Kelly, my wife, said, sounds like a good plan. Let's do it. And we've been a team ever since.
Oh my God, that's awesome. So your wife is also in the practice.
She runs the office.
Okay.
She's the business brains. I let my heart run the show, and that's not very profitable. I give away everything.
Yeah, I get you.
It's funny. I'll tell this interesting story. I had a professional athlete come in. This was probably about 4, 5, 6 months ago. I went in to see him on a Saturday, and often I travel on weekends, but I was in town, and I love my patients, so I'll go in and treat them. Art, I didn't know how to run the credit card machine, and he says, "How much do I owe you?" And I told him he was going to give me a credit card, and he says, "Well, how about cash?" And I thought, holy cow! So he gave me cash for the treatment, and I had been disconnected that I even charged for it. Because I don't do it for the money. I do it for the love of people and the love of, the fascination. I like unwinding the puzzle the human presents and doing all I can to tune them up.
That's great. Yeah, because you're not thinking of money, and I get you because same thing here with me. It's great that you have an administrator because otherwise you'll be broke, loving it, but no money coming in.
Well, let's put it this way. I've got beautiful surroundings, and I can create all, thank all my patients for it. But let's face it, they willingly pay. And my wife says, I'll willingly receive. And me, how much do I owe you? I don't know. How about a hug, right? That's about as good a payment as you can get. But Kelly's got better business sense than I.
That's great. And then you went from engineering to functional medicine transition because you're not just a chiropractor. Tell us about functional medicine, acupuncture. So when did that start too?
Well, it all started in my quest. I was in chiropractic college. And we start studying anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, and I'm thinking
Right.
there's a lot of things that have impact. And I was actually so hungry, I became the president of the technique club, the acupuncture club, the kinesiology club, the nutrition club, and I brought in all these speakers. And I came to realize they all have something amazing to offer. And let's just take that a step further. Anybody that's walked the planet for any time at all, and it might just be 20 years, there's some 20-year-old geniuses, they've made some observation that I haven't. They've got a skill set that I haven't. And one of my favorite philosophies is sometimes a teacher, but always a student.
That's awesome. I did say something like that earlier in one of my posts. I put down that because someone was asking me why are you learning? Why are you interviewing these younger kids? They're 25, 30 years old. I go, well, to pick up on what I missed when I was growing up. And then, so what are they going to learn from you? Well, whatever, they might not run into, they might hear it from us, right? So we learn from everyone. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be open like that. Absolutely.
Well, let's face it, we probably have more 20 and 30-year-old billionaires than ever in the history. They got something on the ball. They know about leverage. They know about networks. They know about technology. And it's not that you and I don't, but they grew up with it. It seems like second nature to them. So we can learn a lot from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then speaking of learning, you learn electrical engineering, and I bet you saw something about control systems engineering, and you probably you made it probably easier for yourself to put together a system because of the way you're thinking, the principles that apply to engineering and the human body.
Well,
I could tell that's what happened with you.
on that a little bit. So one of my favorite professors, he was very, very difficult. He might have even cost me valedictorian because I got an A- in his course, and they score an A- difference. But Dr. Pilati had a PhD in nuclear physics from MIT, and he was all about first principles. If you can't break it down to the very basics, you absolutely don't understand it. So I walk into the first test with Dr. Pilati, and he says, okay, we only have one question: derive Newton's equations of time and motion. And you know what? We had never gone through that, but Newton created calculus, and we had plenty of calculus at that point. And most of us just stared at that paper going, where do we go? But he also taught us critical thinking. All right, let's back up. Let's back up. Where did this start? How did it work? And then evolve it. And that was Dr. Pilati's claim to fame. As, by the way, there's a very famous physicist, Richard Feynman, the youngest guy on the Manhattan Project. He had the lowest IQ of anybody on that project, only 125. But he thought in terms of first principles. And if it weren't for him,
There you go.
I'm not sure we win the war. Now, I'm not a fan of destruction. I am a fan of harnessing power, and we can do that with nuclear. Let's just use it for good. Keep it safe, use it for good.
Yeah, that's incredible. You had that experience. And then what turned for you, since I know that you must have seen conventional medicine early to where there's things missing there. So I gotta dive deeper because that's not gonna be a solution based practice for me, right?
For the most part, that's correct. Now, my family, my sisters and their kids, they're basically all in medicine. They embrace that, and there's a lot of value of medicine,
Yeah.
but it just didn't resonate with me. If you give me a choice of God's pharmacy or man's pharmacy, 99.9 times I'm going to take God's pharmacy. If I'm going to die without a drug, give it to me. If you're going to die without a drug, take it. But for crying out loud, if we build the body, if we prevent, if we follow your 7 C's, Tom Morris's 7 C's, my magnificent 7, I think we get down to that very, very low entry point where we need the lowest dose, shortest duration, maybe once a decade in terms of medication. I can't remember the last med I took. Probably, I do remember. I had a total hip replacement. And I thought, okay, a painkiller would probably be good right about now.
Okay.
But
I didn't know you had the hip replacement. I did tell you I had mine.
I
Just
was, I was more aggressive than I was smart. I was a wrestler in high
same
school,
here.
and I had a major hip injury. And when I went to the medical doctor, they injected me with corticosteroids. And, after 3 different visits, they injected me 3 times. I got some relief, but not total. I went back the 4th time. They said, we can't inject you anymore. And I said, why not? They said, well, the downstream effect of that is total joint disruption. And I said, you got to be kidding me. When's that going to happen? They said, well, if you live long enough, it'll happen in your lifetime. Well, at age 50, it happened. And I'll tell you what, when that hip went, I couldn't pay a surgeon fast enough to replace it because every step was 8 of 10 pain. And I was so limited in what I could do. And you know what? That's something I'm grateful for. I'm grateful medicine can do that.
Exactly. See, that this is what you did mention that. And I think I told you I had a hip replacement just a couple months ago. I'm new. I'm 58, and same thing. I was very aggressive in sports through my life, going crazy with football and I did have an injury in the past, and it happened in jiu-jitsu with the hip, and I stopped it, and I knew it was coming. I had my orthopedic tell me, Art, eventually you're not going to be able to move. So certainly, it came, and it was so painful to just every step. I'm like, I'm done. I just have to throw in the towel, and it's important to get the right people on your team, right? The right orthopedic. And so I did my research and I got with a good team, and I'm recovering very well, and I'm looking forward to walking without pain.
Well, you know what? Good for you. And, I can relate to that. And I can tell you now that I'm 18 months past training martial arts again, feeling really, really good. It's a blessing. It really is. But I like what you said, and I want to expand on that. We all need to be good stewards of our health. We all need to do our due diligence. Find someone who's very, very qualified, whose philosophy you resonate with. If someone addresses cause and effect, they're on our team. If they don't, they probably need to do something different. And the hip, hey, it's destroyed. You can't function. Let's replace it. We can do that. That's essentially cause and effect.
Yep, sure thing. I mean, you have the expertise in chiropractic, kinesiology. You can tell us a little bit about that. Nutrition, of course, acupuncture, and even nursing. So
I agree as well.
there's gaps there that you probably went and picked them apart and said, okay, there's gaps in this one, gaps in this one. I could tell your brain's probably working. Let's put it all together. So you filled it up in a discipline that you're very successful, because I see your clients, I see the testimonies you have. How did that work? How long did it take you to put all that together?
I'm still putting it together, Art.
There you go.
I'll share with you, I was at a major conference, and it was a panel on sports nutrition. And, I've worked with world champions in every major professional sport. And the first question that came out is, most of us have had paradigm shifts. What did you do 30 years ago that you found out was completely wrong and had to retool or rethink? Well, I was very fortunate to answer, I haven't had that experience. When I worked on first principles, we were able to solve things by actually getting after cause and effect right away. I had a very broad base of learning and a different philosophy of thinking. And we could go to Tesla. It's energy, frequency, vibration. Okay. Those clearly are the big 3. And then bioterrain, it was pH, electrical resistance, oxidation reduction potential of blood, saliva, and urine. And I became the country's first bioterrain certified instructor. I would do precise evaluation, know what I wanted to change, have targeted nutrition to make it happen. And I'm very thankful to say that we've seen miracles. People sent home to die that are alive 3 decades later, and world champions tuning up their game, and sometimes earning 50 million extra in their career because we got them that much extra time. That's one person with a lot of income, but good people that'll take that money and use it for the good of the world, which if you're going to use money for good, I wish you all the success in the world.
Yeah, we need more of that for
Yep.
sure. So normal labs, this is one of the big questions all the time. We do labs and it comes back normal, but I'm feeling terrible. What are conventional tests missing here? Because like I said, it's plasma, right? You're not going deep. What are the tests you're looking at? How deep do you go?
Well, one, let's talk about the tests still have value if you know how to look at the test, if you know how to read the test, if you know how to integrate the test. And the range is so broad that you can come in, on the edge of critically ill, but yet you're still in the bottom of that range, or you could have a system which is running too hot and then, oh, well, you're still in range. For instance, my lab range for insulin is something like 3 to 25. Well, I promise you, if you're at 0.9, you are profoundly insulin resistant. And now I just learned through a conference just a month ago that major insurance companies, if your fasting insulin is less than 5, they're going to give you a 20% discount on your life insurance because they know that's a major factor in death. I wrote it in my book, but Robert Lustig's book, Metabolical, he talks about insulin resistance being the common factor in essentially all chronic illness, even inflammation. They have broad ranges on inflammation, even though that's a little tighter. If you've got unchecked inflammation, you're burning up, you're burning out, and something like high sensitivity C-reactive protein, I definitely want it less than 1, but my lab says, hey, if you're 3 or less, well, you're okay. Nah, you're smoldering. You're not a burning forest fire at 2.99, but you're smoldering. Let's get that more under control.
I see. So it's a functional ranges that you're looking at
Versus
disease ranges,
which they're
very important to look at that and not just a humongous range. Wow, they should really work on narrowing that down. It'll make things a lot easier for all of us. But of course,
well, and then we can talk about some of the worst things about that too. Some numbers like cholesterol, they created a standard to put people on drugs. Right. And now we know that if you're over the age of 60, 92% is the number. This is a big British medical journal study. For 92% of people over the age of 60, high LDL is associated with longevity. Gary Brecka, he's getting a lot of press and a lot of podcast time. He says he's never evaluated someone that lived to be 100 with low cholesterol, and in fact, every single one of them he looked at had high cholesterol. So, medicine has missed the boat on that for 4 decades. A lot of people have suffered. We've got to inform people. Now, here's the nice thing, I think. With AI now, you can ask a legitimate question. What's the functional medicine range for this value? And how does that impact my health compared with the medical range? And just put that into a good AI search engine. And I think people will begin to realize, hey, there's almost no justification for cholesterol-lowering drugs. We can almost always do it with diet. But the most important factor, the good cholesterol, HDL, that above 60, just that factor alone takes your risk of cardiovascular disease down to about 10% of someone who's lower. And then if you couple that with low triglycerides, if HDL exceeds triglycerides, that is the lipid panel that's associated with people that live a long, healthy life.
Yes. And then for the average person listening to this, so you're saying HDL at a certain number higher than 60, the triglyceride, there is a formula for that, correct?
Depends on who you listen to. I really like HDL to exceed triglycerides. The scientific consensus is triglycerides should not exceed HDL by more than a factor of 1.5. So if HDL is 60, triglycerides 90 or less. Now I see people that have, HDL 80, 85. They have more latitude. They can take that triglyceride up to 120. And as long as their insulin is good, as long as their sugar is good, that's great. Now, the liver will actually convert any excess sugar into triglyceride. And so if you're using sugar to make triglyceride, usually you're beginning to strain insulin, straining blood sugar, and creating an unhealthy balance. But here's the factor. If the liver does that for so long, the liver can burn out and it can no longer effectively convert sugar to triglyceride. So sugar levels rise, insulin levels rise, triglycerides drop. And if you're only looking at triglycerides, you're missing that this patient is in serious trouble at that point.
What happens a lot. So that's why you're saying insulin resistance is a big problem that we have. So why do you think modern culture has become so obsessed, I guess, with the symptoms, the suppression of symptoms, yet there's a lot more screaming out, right? Or whispering at us, hey,
Yeah, it's the ones that'll kill us. If we have symptoms, we take action. But, when people come to a doctor and say, I have this symptom, they want that symptom resolved. And the doctor has something that can make that symptom just not disappear, but they won't feel it. Right. And if you get a quick fix, you think, well, this doctor must have done me some good. But if they're not addressing cause and effect, you keep taking that drug. It's like putting the warning, the analogy I like is like putting the sticker on the warning light. You can't see it. So you go, oh, everything's fine. But yet you got a serious problem brewing.
Right. You got that red light on your car, just that engine. You put a black sticker on there, it's gone. So yeah, that's what's happening a lot. And you focus heavily on cellular health. Why is the cell the foundation of health, sir? Tell us about that. What destroys the cell health?
You know what? I really like how Bruce Lipton wrote that. He's got a book called The Biology of Belief. And he said, our cells are individual citizens. What's interesting is our cells actually talk to themselves. It's a signal that, medicine calls an autocrine signal, talking to oneself. There's also a paracrine signal. The cells talk to their neighbors. And then there's an endocrine signal, which is a broadcast message throughout. So I use a very ridiculous analogy, in the analogy of cancer. The first thing that happens in cancer is cells lose their ability to effectively communicate. So if I have an audience full of people, I'll say, I noticed, we have 200 people here in the room. None of you are sitting on the other person's lap because you respect the other person's space. Lunch comes around. You're not going to steal anybody else's food because you respect that their food is theirs. And let's face it, when you need to use the restroom, you're going to leave the room and not bother anybody with your mess. Cancer cells violate all that. They steal their neighbor's food, they crowd their space, they poop and pee all over them, and they want them to die. That's a really bad neighbor. And now we know we've known for a long time, 40 years, it's the microenvironment, the cellular environment that actually creates cancer. Low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, immune suppression, and just recently the AGA6 factor, hydrostatic pressure from swelling around the cell. That is the perfect storm of cancer. And how do we make cancer go away? We change the conditions that created it.
Change the environment. And it's just gotten harder, of course, and very confusing for people. We have toxins, we have processed foods, we have the stress overload with, just lifestyle, the EMFs, we talk about poor sleep, all these emotional traumas, you name it. That's going to be a cellular dysfunction, right? It's going to break down the cells.
Sure. Well, and keep in mind that our cells are normally naturally aging. And so as they age, they start to slow down. The body has some repair processes. But if that doesn't work, there's another process called autophagy, which literally means to eat oneself. And that won a Nobel Prize in 2016 when this scientist had been studying that for his whole life. He said, look, how we recycle our dead and dying cells is probably as critical a factor in health as any other factor. And it turns out he's exactly right, especially by the time people start getting into our demographic. Hey, we got cells that they've run their course. Now the body needs to clean them out. If they stick around, they could mutate, they could intoxicate the environment. There's bad things that happen when cells die and they're not cleared away.
What's your view on, you hear it a lot with detoxes, but the heavy metals and parasites in the cells, biofilm, all that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one, we all have them. We don't exist without those things. So the question about parasites, do you have parasites or do parasites have you? And, if you're having GI symptoms or if there's, something in your body that doesn't seem right, and there's a blood marker called eosinophils, that one will elevate with allergy or parasite. That's the specific immune marker. You won't hurt people doing a parasite cleanse. In fact, it used to be a grandmother's old remedy that they give a little sugar cube and soak it in turpentine, and they'd take that, and that would kill the parasite. I visited some very old-time doctors my first years in practice, and they were saying, hey, oil of turpentine, great anti-parasite, and it won't hurt anybody to do one of it. I bought my first bottle of oil of turpentine. It said, may be harmful or fatal if swallowed. So I called the doctor that said, hey, this is what this says. He says, yeah, it's harmful or fatal to the parasite. Just don't you take too much. Now, right. The heavy metals, this is a crime against humanity. They found out by 1920 that lead in gasoline was for human beings creating reproductive and neurologic harm, but it was the early playbook of suppression of information. Now, anybody can go to AI and look up Rockefeller, General Motors, and DuPont, and they collaborated to suppress the information about how bad lead was. Now, I don't recall the year. It seems like it was sometime maybe in the 90s where they started really getting serious about lead in gasoline, and you get unleaded. Reality is we should have been doing that over 100 years ago. And now that they can study the skeleton, because that's where most heavy metals are stored, the modern skeleton, this is right out of the medical literature, has 500 to 1,000 times the lead of pre-industrialized humans. So
Still to the day, huh?
Every one of us is heavy metal toxic. Now, we're not all going to react the same, but when I see an immune problem, because that's the bone marrow makes the immune system, or even hematologic malignancy, leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, one of my first strategies is a heavy metal detox.
Okay. Yeah, we focus a lot on mercury. We talk about aluminum in the air, also, but so lead is still a problem. Obviously, I think in 78 they got rid of the lead-based paints for new homes, but it's still in the air, in the food, soil, everywhere. And it's not the only one.
No,
there's new
lead,
ones as well.
cadmium, mercury, nickel, tin. And these, by the way, are known as metalloestrogens. So if you take a look at men, I was giving a conference on men's health, and I asked, let's say there's 200 people in the room. I said, are men as manly as they were 2 generations ago? And I swear every woman in the room said, absolutely not. Now that doesn't mean there's not some guys that still have testosterone, still have that male role model. But let's face it, over the last decades, it's been the rise of the beta male. Not every male's supposed to be an alpha, but we all ought to be capable of being an alpha.
Correct.
As Jordan Peterson says, a weak man is not a virtuous man. In fact, he's a vulnerable man. We need to be strong, and there's different kinds of strong. There's world strongman strong, or there's people that just have strong character and learn other ways to defend themselves. Weapons can be amazing neutralizers. We men are supposed to be protectors, and I take that role seriously.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I completely agree on that. I mean, the chronic stress, the physical changes that have been occurring, you can see it in men. You can see it. There is an awakening on that, so that's a good thing. So we got to keep just spreading the word on that. But it's definitely not allowing us to heal. So I'm glad you brought it up because, I was wondering what your thoughts were on these detoxifications. And I think it's more important to focus on the heavy metals and not so much on the parasites. Because, yes, like you said, we have parasites. The thing is to balance it, right? To balance the pathogens in our body that are always going to be there. But the heavy metals is a big hit.
Heavy metals, we have a hard time clearing those. Now, the body makes something called a metallothionein protein. And that's one of the best ways to clear metals. Well, guess what? Our ability to make that drops with age. But there are certain botanicals that I like. Reishi, for instance, after 2 weeks of consistent dosing, increases what's known as metallothionein protein 800% in 2 weeks.
Wow.
But metallothionein is a zinc-dependent molecule. And I don't know if you screen for zinc. I do it in everybody. And I'm going to tell you what, 95% of people walking around have a functional zinc deficiency, not a pathological, but a functional. They don't have enough zinc to keep their prostate, their testosterone, their aromatase, their digestive system, their immune system optimal.
Yes. And like I said, it's confusing for people because we hear magnesium deficiency, we hear zinc deficiency, we hear iron deficiency. So it's like, let me go grab this supplement, that supplement. But we forget about the fact that it was in the food at one point. So if you ate correctly, whole foods, you would get the amounts, right? Well, so now, are you now being forced to actually, set up a protocol with supplements for your patients?
Almost always. So there was an article in Advances in Therapy years ago. It was very intelligent. They actually did tissue biopsies and measured nutrient levels. And the groups they did it on, they split them into 2 demographics. They all got a really good organic diet that would supposedly meet all the nutritional needs.
Right.
And one group got diet and supplementation. Well, they went back in and biopsied the tissue, after a period of time, it might have been 90 days, and they realized the people that ate the really good diet did not improve their nutrient status at all, whereas people that took supplementation had measurable improvement. So the conclusion from the article was very simple. Food is too weak to replete depleted cells and bodies. Therefore, supplementation is advisable for everyone. At least a good good omega-3s. By the way, a good multivitamin also has multi-mineral. You want a real good quality because then it's not going to have contaminants or preservatives or additives, and it'll be bioavailable. You know, if someone says, well, iron, that's simple. I eat a nail. No, you're not going to digest a nail, and if you don't puncture your gut on the way out, it's going to pass out just like it came in. So no, you need nutrients in a form that your body can utilize them.
Yeah, and a very good example is the apple. They use the apple now, right? They compare the apple of today from 20 years ago or 50 years ago, way off the charts in the nutrients that are missing. And It's unbelievable. So that's right there. It's a good example why we need
Let's take a step further, because beyond vitamins, minerals, whatever that they're measuring, fiber, things like that, there are phytochemicals, the plant's immune system. And so we've known a long, long time that when plants have herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, they don't have to develop an immune system, and those plant messages are not getting to the person. So food is absolutely information, and it may be more information than it is macro and micronutrients. How much information? Compare the information in a Snickers bar to an organic apple. One's going to kill you. The other, apple's not a perfect food. We need a little more protein than that, but you get the idea. One's going to nourish your body, mind, and spirit. The other's going to deplete everything you own.
Yes. And another thing that comes up is absorption of supplements. That's why it's very important, like you said, the quality of the supplement. Do your research. Ask your health practitioner what they recommend, because unfortunately we have a lot of, cutting corners to these, even some knockoff pills out there on Amazon. So you got to be very careful. People complain, I take supplements, I feel like crap. What are you taking? Are you absorbing them? Are they bioactive, bioavailable, right?
The last time I checked, they said that 10%, so 1 in 10 supplements online is fraud.
1 in 10.
Better off to connect directly with the manufacturer or a doctor that's connected. I use in my clinic, of course, all professional lines, which is not available to everybody. But these companies have gone the extra mile to find out what combinations work best, what's the best, most bioavailable, and how do we keep it clean? And those are critical questions.
Yeah, and you actually could communicate with the organic chemist or whoever's making in the labs the supplements. They actually are live people there. So that's a good thing about having a health practitioner that directly gets the supplements from a source they already vetted and take themselves, right? Okay, well, let's switch it up to the spiritual and divine component from your book. It speaks about divine truth, alignment, and natural laws. So what do you mean by that?
Well, let's go to the second 7. My first 7, eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right. The next 7 are mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, and impactful. And spiritual is right up near the very top. In fact, I asked AI, rate these, and where do you put them in terms of hierarchy of what we need to approach? Spiritual was number 6 of 7, with only impactful behind that. So it's hard to be, spiritually minded if you're sick as a dog, if everything hurts, if you're in bad relationships, if you don't have any money. We start going on and on. If your body's falling apart, well, some people might say, well, that's when I'm most connected to God. Well, treat your body like a temple is wisdom that I really, really like. And think about that. We're also supposed to be fruitful and multiply. Depending on what scripture you read, you need a healthy body to do that. But I believe that we're all here for a much higher purpose than ourselves. And, your purpose and mine are on a very parallel path, but there are people completely different. I mean, we might take Elon Musk. He didn't get his spiritual calling until very, very recently, but he seems to be, in my book, very, very good for the world. He started out with simple things like getting people paid easier. Then, well, how can we make the environment better? And then it turned out to be an advocate of free speech. I think he feels he has a higher calling. And why is intergalactic travel being a focus? I don't know, but I'll give him a nod. He's brighter than I am on a lot of categories. He's developed differently, and he's using his gifts beautifully. But I think the ultimate in spirituality is treat others like you want to be treated. Find your special gift, cultivate it, and pay it forward in a way that makes the world better.
Oh, yeah. And I didn't know he's gotten more spiritual So that's good to know. I mean, I do see he does do purposeful things like, with his satellites, he gives a lot to countries that don't have that, and he does look. Seems like he has peace in his heart, forgiveness. So yeah, it's great to have someone like him. We need more like him, right? To be emotionally aligned, right, with God, and that definitely helps us all. But yeah, you're right. We can't really heal. There's, people approach me all the time. I am, broke. I unhealthy. I just got divorced. How you're telling me to follow these, 7 C's that you have? I just can't focus. Spiritual. I can't connect, and that's one thing. That's why you said there are layers, right? So what are your layers? What's your number one first, 1 through 7?
Well, physical, right? And we are physical beings in a physical body. What would you be if you weren't physical? You'd be spirit. So we're not on this path anymore. Next is going to be mental. So you got to get that mind right, because very few things you do with your body without thinking. Certainly we have reflexes, but we choose what to eat. We choose what to drink. And when we train ourselves, we can choose what to think. And I'll tell you what, a lot of what's going on between our ears is hijacked, by signals and subtle messages and everything else. Then we go into emotional. We are emotional creatures. This is a fascinating thing. Our brain processes emotions much faster than logic. And it's a self-defense thing. If you're walking along a path and you see a garden hose curled up, your first result, you might think it's a snake. You drop back, because that could potentially save your life. Now, you got to have a filter on those emotions. We can somewhat train it. It's going to come fastest. But I believe it was Viktor Frankl that, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning and survived concentration camp horrors. And what he said, in the gap between any stimulus and response, there's a gap. And that gap is where our life is made. If you run on emotions, and I'm guilty of that. I had a little blow up that was unwarranted yesterday because too many things came together all at once. It's like, I got to let this out, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's
it happens.
But yeah, if I just, was more trained and said, hey, look, everything works out. Yeah, that went wrong and that went wrong and that went wrong. But here's my experience. Things always work out. Not what's your lesson I'm supposed to learn. Maybe you be a little more proactive, but that gets us there. So then we go to social. Man is a social animal. We know that isolation, right? I forget what they call it, solitary confinement. It's one of the worst tortures they can ever do to a human being, and it's reserved for the worst of the worst. Then we go into financial. Let's face it, it's hard to have a good life. One of my favorite books, Wallace Wattles, The Science of Getting Rich, he said we have a moral obligation to be rich, because we can't be our best self if we're struggling for money. Then we come into the spiritual, and then finally you put all those things in a row. Now you're in a position to add value to the world, so that's impactful. Now, do some people skip levels effectively? Yeah, but it's not ideal. Not ideal.
Yeah, that's a almost perfect order, actually. I would have to agree, because you're right. The vessel has to be functional. If you're going to get to number 6 or 7, you better have that vessel working.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, and then the mindset, we have so many issues right now with mental health and emotional. I get it. We're very reactive, and I think we are, through the television and stuff, we've become more reactive than critical thinkers, right? So there's got to be a balance. Yes, emotions are part of our world, but we have to be able to balance that to be more responsive, which is critical thinking. All right, let me breathe and let me think about this before I even answer Bob here, before I go crazy. Then just to, it's so easy just to be emotionally reactive, and that's why you see all these issues on highways with people in cars going nuts just because you get cut off accidentally, by the way, by somebody else. It's a practice. We have to, if you're a person that says, well, that's the way I am, I'm very emotional. No, you could practice. You could practice to get better. Don't tell me that. You could practice.
Well, we certainly all have tendencies. And let's face it, if these tendencies serve us, awesome. But if they work against us, work on them. And so you can learn to center yourself. You can learn to breathe. I've been so blessed to train with martial arts grandmasters. It's hard to rattle these guys because they have so much confidence. Yes. They pretty much know nothing's going to be a threat. Someone might come up and just be making a lot of noise and they'll just smile at him. One of my grandmasters was actually confronted, with a knife on the street, and he just looked at the guy. He says, I promise you, you want to put that away. You know, I'm very well trained, and if you make me take that away from you, it's going to be a bad day for you. So, you know, let's just put that away. And you know what? The guy put it away.
That's awesome. He probably said it so smoothly too.
You know, I could see him saying it because he responds the same everything. You're kidding, right? You're going to try that on me? You don't know who you're dealing with here. It would be a very bad decision for you. So just put it away, you know? And how wonderful to have that level of confidence.
Yes, that's a big practice we need to work on for sure. So let me ask you this. What are 5 foundational practices that nearly everyone should prioritize? Well, you do them, I'm sure. Give me some of them.
Let's go one in every major category, right? So eat right. You know, even though we're going to call this foundational, my summary of nutrition is eat real food, clean food, not too much, not too often, every color, every day in a way that honors your physiology, your genetics, your body goals, mostly plants. There's a lot of mouthful there, but choose clean. That's going to be the thing. Choose real, clean food. When it comes to drink right, distilled water is killed water. But what's the best water? The best water has the right minerals because water doesn't work in a vacuum. It's also alkaline. That's part of the minerals, and it's also structured. There's a lot of information coming out about what's now called the 4th phase of water, structured water, which is critical to health and energy and biologic systems. You get structured water through plants. So interesting enough, plants over 90% water. Be very consistent with those plants in their hydrated state, and you will get the best water available. Think right. Now we've got to get into the parasympathetic state. You know, I think you said in one of the things you were saying, you know, as you were speaking to my response, take a deep breath. What does that do? That drives the parasympathetic nervous system, especially if you do it through your nose. It gets you out of fight or flight, and it gets you in a peaceful state. Move right. You know what? It doesn't have to be complex, but I like every joint, every range of motion, every day, pain-free. And there's some online things where you can do that in a matter of just a few minutes. And I think people's bodies are worth that. And then if we're going to go with the 5th, sleep. Sleep is my number 1 self-care habit. As one of my mentors said, a great day starts the night before. And if we don't have a great night, he says, you know, if we're tired, we could all be tall 2-year-olds. And, you know, we love our 2-year-olds, but they're 2. We don't want to be 2 when we're 22, 32, 42, 52, 60.
Exactly.
You know?
Wow, those are great. Yeah, I mean, someone feeling overwhelmed, burned out, those are 5 simple habits and hugely important habits that we should add to our life every day, you know, consistently. Of course, yes, we're going to miss some, right? Out of the 5, you're going to do 3. Well, that's a big change already, especially the sleep. Yeah, it feels terrible. I mean, I remember when I was a young kid in college and we used to go out partying, right? I get home at 3, 4 in the morning, and I had a part-time job, so I had to get up and go work. Oh my gosh. How would I ever do that at 58? I would die. I don't think I would make it. So yeah, it's even when you're young, you feel it.
Well, yeah. Well, you have the wisdom now to change. And think about that. You had a lot of buffer, a lot of resilience at 20 or whatever age that was. So you're right. Resilience is going to go down. Now for you and I, slower than a lot of people, thankfully. But let's face it, as I heard it said, if someone says, well, I could do everything I could do when I was 20, well, then the response is, well, obviously you weren't doing much when you were 20, you know?
That's a good one. Okay.
When I look at my athleticism at 20 and I still like to become an athlete, oh my gosh, the 20-year-old me would run circles around me, even though I'm still pretty good for my demographic.
That's funny. I'm glad you said that because there is a lot of people online saying, oh yeah, I'm 45 and I'm better than when I was 25. I'm like, I can't say that.
Not physically. We hope mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
Right.
Right. But physically, no. We all have those hits. Sorry. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to switch it up to, I like to call it my rapid fire round of questions that I'll ask you. And just, you know, whatever comes up, no thinking, I'll ask. And I'm sure you'll be fine with them because you practice them, most of them all the time. So let me ask you. Here we go. Morning sunlight or a cold plunge for you?
Morning sunlight.
Okay. Biggest health myth that bugs you?
We need drugs. You know, we're sold that idea. No, healthy bodies don't get sick. Healthy bodies don't need drugs. Drugs intoxicate. Nutrients and natural strategies heal and replenish.
Okay, great. And then one supplement almost everyone needs more of.
The Resolve in form of omega-3. I have nearly a full chapter on that. Nobel Prize nominated research. One, we're very deficient in omega-3s. When we get Omega-3s, our body makes micro amounts of what are known as resolvins, and they're named aptly. Everything resolves better with the resolvins on board. Since we don't have omega-3s, we can't make the resolvins we need. And what's the result of having not enough resolvins? Inflammation stays rather than goes to healing.
A lot of oxidative stress, right? So now let me add to that. Do you recommend the whole foods of the omegas or also supplements? Both.
Both. There's very few people. Grass-fed organic beef has a good ratio omega-6 to omega-3. Cold water fish has good omega-3s. There's very few people, especially in this part of the world, that through diet alone get enough omega-3s. But here's still the same reality. We're toxic, we're stressed, we're missing some micronutrients. Even if we have the omega-3s, we may not be making the ideal level of resolvins. So and by the way, the resolvins are packaged with other omega-3s. So it's really a complete omega.
Great. Yeah, good to know. Now, one thing you'd remove from every grocery store if you had that power.
Wow, 90+%. If it's in a package, get rid of it.
Yeah, there you go. Packaged. Anything that's packaged, gone. That means all the middle aisle is gone.
Yep.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Okay, most underrated healing habit.
Underrated. Boy, sleep is getting a lot of press. Breathing is getting a lot of press. Moving is getting a lot of press. So it's hard to figure out which one is, not given enough press. But I guess I'm going to go with sleep. Not enough people are taking it serious enough.
So is it circadian rhythms also, like the whole shebang, where from the morning, what you're doing from the daytime, to prepare for that?
I've got a chapter on circadian biology.
Okay.
And what a lot of people with intermittent fasting, the easiest time to fast is morning, right? You wake up and you go, oh, let me start eating at noon, and then I can eat till 8 and I can have dinner with my family. But they found out that the ideal feeding window is about 7 a.m. to 3. The same food eaten at 8 p.m. as 7 p.m. has twice the insulin response, twice the blood sugar response, twice the fat storing response. The body is winding down at night. It's building up during the day. Why not fuel it appropriately? And our circadian biology definitely supports that.
And it's amazing that this was known 5,000 plus years ago, because I studied Ayurveda, and that's exactly what they said without the science behind them. This is just confirming.
How great for you to go back, because if something has persisted for 5,000 years, there's got to be something to it. Hippocrates was a chiropractor. He wrote a book on spinal manipulation. Acupuncture has been around for 5,000 years. I don't know how long breath work and meditation has been around. Go back to these, monks, 5,000 years. This stuff was back then, keeping people alive. It's a myth that people, died early. If you got to be 5, unless you had a warring tribe kill you, you lived a long, healthy life. Michelangelo lived to be 87 years old, and, if you got through those first 5 years, childhood diseases were a problem, but hey, they didn't have modern medicine. They had purpose and passion. And I'll tell you what, that makes a good life.
Purpose and passion. That is correct. That's your natural medicine there. And, it's funny you mentioned the fact that, there's science out there saying that, people died at 20, 30 years old. Well, my question is always, well, who were you studying? Because were you studying the Cape? Because if I go, for example, if I go to the worst, I'll go to Texas. I'm sorry, but I heard McAllen, Texas is the worst, the unhealthiest or more obese city in the U.S. Don't quote me on that, but it's one of them. So if I do a study in McAllen, Texas, I'm going to find so many diabetics. I'm going to say, well, in the 2026, the whole world was so diabetic. They were dying early, But if I take you to a long living culture, anywhere in the world, there's many. They wouldn't talk about them, but there is many. Yeah. You're going to see people dying at over 100 years old. So where did this study come from? You
know what? And what was the purpose of it? Are they trying to prove something, right? And you visited the blue zones, right? Have you been to all of them? Yeah, I read that, in your bio, and we had a little discussion about that. Good for you. You've seen what works, you apply what works, and clearly it's working for you.
Yes, I'm missing Japan, and I'm hoping to be there in a couple months, knock on wood, because of the fuel prices. So if everything works out, I'll be in Japan very soon. But yeah, I'm fascinated by long living cultures. And I don't like to call them blue zones because they do leave out a lot of different areas, because every corner of the world you could find sure. These long living cultures. So I like to just call them long living cultures and not blue zones. But yeah, it's amazing how they live so simple and slowing down, and all the 7s that you talked about, they're covering them. They're not looking into what's the best biohack that, that's working. Well, what's the best? Well, let me ask you, what biohack that is not a biohack that you love to work on? or it is a natural biohack, right? What is a biohack? Tell us.
Let's talk about biohacks, right?
Yeah,
And Dave,
let's talk about that.
what a good guy. He came up with some really good ways to essentially, hijack physiology for the way you want to move it. But, in my book, I wrote a chapter on biohacks. I talk about smart cuts versus shortcuts. When someone's healthy and fit and strong and is dotting the I's, crossing the T's, biohacks can take them to the next level. But if they don't have their baseline health in place, it's like putting a set of racing sport tires on a car where the engine is broken and the body's falling apart. It just doesn't make any sense. So you've got to dot the I's and cross the T's with the things we talk about. And once you have the basics covered, well, then let's start looking in other directions. I like red light therapy. I like infrared sauna. I like vibration plates. I like earthing. Is earthing a biohack? Or we go with a pulsed electromagnetic field mat. There's some value to that. Grounding sheets. I use those things. Those are all good. Lately hydrogen water. I might consider that a biohack, and there's some good data behind that. Who would have thought? I thought a little, we're all too acid. Why would, hydrogen water work? But guess what? Because we're acid, our body buffers alkaline and even decreases a little bit the delivery of oxygen to tissue. If we can just put a little acid into that blood, we more efficiently deliver oxygen. Biohacks can be good. I've used vibration suits. I've used suits with electrical stimulators. I've done blood flow restriction training. I've played with them. I've lectured at biohacking conferences. In fact, I'll lecture at another in October in Toronto, Canada. They're good, but they don't take the place of mastering the basics.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned hydrogen. I just interviewed the hydrogen man. It's called Greg the Hydrogen Man, and talked about the best products out there because it's important. If you're going to mess with hydrogen, you better have a good machine. And you being an engineer, you should know the engineering is very important because of what the byproducts that could be produced through that, what do you call the membrane and the separate compartments there. You have to make sure you're getting the right machine when you're going to work with hydrogen. So yeah, it's a good topic to talk about and dive deeper in. That's why I interviewed him, and he's going to be coming up soon. And he doesn't work for any company, but he pretty much breaks down the top four. And to my surprise, well, once he explains it, I'm not surprised. The metals, they come out of Japan. They're they're known, the samurai warriors, they have the perfect metals. I guess they have that experience with the metals. And I heard that they don't have any, because the problems we have with these small hydrogen bottles, I think it's, they're plated or coated. And after, with the energy, with the high level of heat, they're going to break down and we're going to be drinking them. And apparently the Japanese, they don't do plated or coated. It's the straight titanium. So I was like, that is fat. People need to know this. So yeah, I interviewed him, and we'll be pulling that out.
I'll be excited for that podcast episode.
Yeah, it's very interesting with hydrogen. It's gaining a lot of traction. But again, like you said, we got to go to the foundations first. And yes, water is super important. You talked about it, clean water, and I love how you mentioned about the plants. Say that once again. So the plant itself
plant is living, and it literally structures the water. And so there's plenty of lectures on that, but think about it. You've got an oak tree that's, 400 feet in the air. How in the world does that water go up those capillaries from the ground? And it changes form. It becomes gel-like, and there's literally like a chain of attraction all the way up that if you had to pump up through those capillaries, you'd have a hard time creating force if it weren't for the restructuring of the water. It's beyond fascinating. And our cells, our living cells, have structured water within it.
Yes.
They call it easy water, the exclusion zone. And there's a book called The Fourth Phase of Water. Gerald Pollack, brilliant researcher, I think he started out as an electrical engineer. Then he became a biomedical engineer. And then he's studying muscle contraction. All of a sudden he realized, whoa, water is really where it's at. Water in our cells is structure, and there's new evidence that water actually can generate light that empowers our mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell. So very fascinating information.
Now, there's a lot of great information out there with the melanin too. Apparently it creates a diffusion of water, and the water becomes gas and the hydrogen gas. So that's how it apparently can be giving that energy to the mitochondria, something like that. Amazing. It's a lot of great stuff out there. So that's why we like this. We love the ancient wisdom, right? And we definitely have to love the modern science. We can't leave it out. Of course, there is manipulated science out there that we tend to fight and they're done for other reasons, which is usually driven by money, not necessarily people's health, right? So let me switch it up here. Let me put you on a time machine now before we go.
Okay.
If you could go back and speak to your 18-year-old self, before all that experience you gained, before all those 1,000 patients you saw, before all that wisdom, what would you tell him to prepare him for life, meaning of life?
Wow. Pretty fascinating, right? And I've heard other people answer this question. And, one of the biggest pieces of wisdom is things have a way of working out. So honor your body, mind, and spirit, your own calling, find it, seek wisdom, you'll find it. But, we've all had things that happen in our life that we say, my God, why did this happen to me? And then 5 years later, you got the lesson, you're stronger for it, you're empowered for it, you have your own little hero's journey, and you come back better, stronger, faster, smarter, ready to serve the world. So we're going to have these dips, we're going to have these seasons, we're going to have these cycles, but know and always know in your heart that things have a way of working out. And when you know that, you're likely to be better. In my book, I write about the Stockdale paradox. James Stockdale was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, tortured for 5 straight years. And they asked him, how did you survive? And who survived and who didn't? He said, it was the optimists that died earliest, because they said, well, we'll be out for Christmas. Then they were disappointed. We're going to be out by Easter. Then they were disappointed. We're going to be out by July 4th. They were disappointed. They were out, we'll be out by Thanksgiving. Then they were disappointed and they died of a broken heart. So Stockdale said he had unwavering faith that would all work out. But he also realized until it did, there was going to be a lot of grief to face. That might be true in life, where none of us gets out unscathed. If we have the knowing that it's all going to work out, I think it's easier on us and those around us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate how you bridge everything together, especially your science, the systems thinking, spirituality, which is great. It's rare, believe it or not. And, the real clinical experiences you have. So, you're not focused too much on just trends. Well, you're not at all, actually. You're clinical, so you're not. The hacks, like you said, you do have a chapter on biohacks, but know when to apply them. But the principles are amazing. So I love the book. What is one chapter you would tell us to read that we absolutely have to go through in your book?
Well, my goal in writing the book was that someone could open up any random page and get some pearl of wisdom and something actionable. But I think it's going to be a different chapter for different people. Pick whatever your weak link is. Now, if you're socially challenged, read the chapter about social. If your emotions run away, run that. If you're seeking spirituality, look at what it's not my wisdom. It's all from other sources. There's a few things in life that may be original for me, but they're very, very few. If you want to know about diet, do the drink right. If you are not hydrating ideally, read the drink right. If the mind is giving you problems, read the think right, or maybe the mental chapter. But it's going to be different for everybody. My hope is that every chapter adds value. Whether you're a seasoned pro that pretty much knows everything, the chapter has something for you. If you're brand new, the chapter definitely has something for you. Everybody will be able to pick a starting point.
So it's an evergreen book, because you could go back to it. And you go back into the chapter you read 3-5 years ago, or something new.
I've been writing it for 40 years, and it finally came together. And one of my greatest challenges was, it was never done. And reality is, it isn't done. I've learned more. I published it a month ago, and I know so much more already. So they're probably going to
second edition coming,
second edition, third edition. But reality is, hey, we're never done. We're always learning. Is the information going to stand on its own? It absolutely will. Has it stood the test of time? It absolutely has. You apply it, you'll get value.
All right. Well, where can people find you? Where can they find Magnificent by Design? Is it ebook, paperback?
It's a paperback on Amazon. I may convert it to a Kindle form. Eventually, I think I like an audio form as well, but Amazon is where you get the book. Okay. I've got 2 different websites, drbobrakowski.com or thedrbob.com, thedrbob.com, and Dr. Bob Rakowski is drbobrakowski.com. So, fairly easy I do say fairly easy, but I got heavily censored after 2020 because I was saying things that certain people didn't want. Like, hey, if you get sunshine, if you relax your stress, if you take your vitamins, this isn't going to be a problem for you. But somehow that message really got blocked.
Yeah, but you're still on Instagram.
I am.
You're on Instagram, right? So we'll make sure we notate it here that where to find you on Instagram, because from there you have all your links as well, the websites, the book, and all that. It's very important. But yeah, it's hard. Looks like they started to censor again and shadow ban because I just did. And it came from a simple interview. I was interviewing somebody and I put the podcast clip on there. And from there, I've been like, the algorithms are just blocking it. So you never know what's going to happen. That's what you have to be. I think we have to be, just sharing the information, collaborating. Because when you collaborate, then everyone's sharing all the great stuff. And no matter it doesn't matter to me if I'm a million viewers or a million followers. It doesn't matter to me. What's important is us collaborating and getting the word out to people. So that's great. I'm glad I had you on here, Dr. Bob. I know your time is very, 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 very tight, especially with the book coming out. So I appreciate you. We went over an hour. That's awesome. And for the people that are listening, you got it right here. I'm going to put all the information here for Dr. Bob. Okay. Just remember that, aging alone is not the problem. It's actually aging without the intention that becomes the problem. And that's why when you have such a base like from the book, you'll be fine. And they're foundational. A lot of these things are free, right? Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think the best things in life are free. We just have to realize that love, a hug, good sunshine, fresh air, clean water may not be free. We have to seek a little bit for that because we've intoxicated the world. Unless, of course, you take a bite of that apple, right? That organic apple grown on that beautiful tree. Then you're getting clean, healthy, structured water. So, I do believe the best things in life are free.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And we will see you on the next episode. And again, Dr. Bob, we have all your information. Let's get the word out for your book.
Thank you, Art.
Peace.